Today, I'm joined by a powerhouse in the franchising world, Matt Friedman. Matt's the founder and CEO of Wing Zone, which he started in his fraternity house in college and grew it to 140 locations over 6 countries. He's written his story in a book called From Frat House to Franchising, the Wing Zone story. Matt's gone on to consult with numerous, mostly emerging franchise brands. And so just a ton of knowledge. And I've had the chance to talk a little bit with Matt, read his book. It's a fantastic story. We'll make sure to put a link to that in the notes for everyone to find. But I'm very, very excited and honored to have Matt joining me here on the show today. So, Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Wes. Really appreciate some of the listeners tuning in and taking some time out of their day to listen to my story. Hopefully, I'll provide a few great nuggets of information, and you'll learn a little bit about some of my successes, but also some of my mistakes.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I think it's a big part of why franchising works when it's done right is because, anyone coming in as a new franchisee to a system, especially if they are first-time business owners, which a lot of people buying franchises are first-time business owners. Part of what you're getting is you're benefiting from the mistakes that the franchisor and other franchisees before you have already made, and so it can really kind of compress that learning curve. So I have no doubt you'll have more than a couple of nuggets that everyone will be able to take away from it today. So excited to get into it. So I gave a little bit of an introduction, but maybe add a little bit of color to that. Give us kind of a 90-second overview of Wing Zone, where you started in college and how you got to the point of 140 locations and being able to sell the entire brand, and then we'll kind of unpack some of it from there.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to share with people that it was a 27-year voyage. So this was not a sprint, it was a marathon. And I think for so many people out there, they rush into growth. They rush into trying to get to be the biggest out there. And I think methodical growth really makes sense. I think for me, man, humble beginnings to the 10th degree, right? Didn't have any money. The story behind Wing Zone was that we started in our fraternity house kitchen with a $500 investment, without a ton of knowledge other than a lot of passion and grit. From the fraternity house, we leaned on the people, and I say we, I had a business partner, Adam Scott, for 27 years. We leaned on our parents to lend us the money to open our first storefront in 1994 in Gainesville, Florida, home of the Florida Gators. And from there, that was the beginning of Wing Zone with one location. We subsequently built 6 more company-owned stores and then started franchising Wing Zone in 2001 until my exit in 2021. So through that voyage, so to speak, we started as restaurant operators and then became really passionate about the franchise industry and understood a lot through that time.
So a 27-year overnight success story.
Yeah, we never really, it's so funny you say that because everybody always views people like as they get to a certain level as, oh my God, you guys were so successful. We never really viewed ourselves that way. I don't know, it was just because of humble beginnings or just bootstrapped our way to business, but we always thought that we never you never reach that pinnacle of success. Like one day you wake up like, I am a successful entrepreneur. It's a
Yeah.
lifelong voyage.
I think it's like that with so many things in life, like, whether it's fitness, like there's not really a finish line, right? Like, even if you get to kind of a point where you're like, okay, this was the goal when I started, in most cases, you're still not going to be, 100% satisfied. You're going to push to get more. I think it's like this with, we were just talking about our kids before we started recording. My wife and I had a rare date night a couple of nights ago, and we're driving home, and she's like, do you ever just kind of laugh to yourself when, because our kids are younger right now. She's like, do you ever just kind of laugh to yourselves when it's like, clearly these kids think we like have it all figured out. Like we know the answer to everything, and like we're just, taking it one day at a time. Like every day for us is, the furthest into parenthood that we've been yet. So yeah, there's not a finish line. And you guys are in the restaurant industry, like that's a massive industry. Wings alone is a big, sector of that industry. So, I imagine that might have played into it a little bit as well, is that even though you guys were clearly successful, there's always someone bigger out there that, you could potentially be, kind of looking at and saying, well, we're not as big as they are, so we haven't made it yet.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, I want to go back to really the beginning, which I think is such a great story of, we really focused on understanding our consumer. Now, being 21 years old when we started this business, we were the end consumer, the college student, the lazy customer, the one that didn't have a vehicle, that wanted to just call. This is even before the advent of online ordering to just get great wings delivered. And so I always encourage people two things. Number one is really focus on your consumer first, really understand them and find your niche in the market. And then the other thing is it's great to study competitors who have kind of paved the way. What is your differentiation? What are you going to be better than them at? My whole philosophy was studying a phenomenal brand, which was Domino's Pizza. They owned pizza delivery in college markets. And my whole philosophy was just creating a different menu group, but still going after that consumer. And so, my first business plan was a one-page business plan. It wasn't this 17-page PowerPoint that had all these financials in it. It was like, this is what we're going to do. And I do think that that was something we always reflected back on when we made big decisions, like, does this resonate with our end consumer?
Yeah, that's a great well, I mean, a number of great points there, but yes, really understanding your consumer and what they want, and then kind of using that to say, okay, how can we not only solve that, but use that to differentiate ourselves from competitors, but um, not overcomplicating it. I think a lot of people get stuck and they just spin their wheels because they have this idea for a business, but they think they need the, 17 slide presentation deck with, all the financial project. And it's not to say that, that those things don't become relevant, but I think more often than not, if you just take those first couple of steps to get started, that's when things start to happen. That's when you're going to start to learn. And, business, like most other things in life, as we've already kind of touched on, so much of it is just about momentum. So
You're absolutely right. I
I'm,
want to add one thing that,
yeah, please.
you know, simplicity of business model is so important because it allows you to focus on fewer things and do them really well. When we first opened up, I would say, "Yeah, I own Wing Zone. We're a buffalo wing restaurant." I said, "Oh, well, you guys have TVs and how many beers you have?" I said, "No, no, no, no. We are in the takeout delivery business. We're going to bring it to you. We're not a sports bar." And we were very focused on living in that kind of arena where people resonated wings with like going out, and we were like, "No, we're totally like, you're gonna pick it up, we're gonna deliver it to you. It's an alternative to pizza." So I think that was our differentiator, and I think it was really cool to kinda do something new and innovative.
Well, absolutely. So I have a couple questions that I'm curious about, and I think the audience probably is too. So, number one, where did the idea come from? I mean, to be 21 years old and say, "Hey, I'm gonna, look at this massive company, Domino's, and try to somewhat replicate what they've done, but with wings." Like, where did the drive, where did the motivation come from? I mean, I mean, I know University of Florida, man. There's a lot of partying going on and stuff there. Like most guys at 21 in a frat house are probably not thinking all that much about a business plan, and if they are, they're probably not really taking any real action on it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. And first of all, as a kid growing up, I grew up in a middle class family just outside of New York City in Long Island, New York. And, my mom was a teacher. My dad had a full time job for a company. But I always looked at these business owners as like pseudo celebrities. Like I always wanted to be them. I don't care if you owned a local pizzeria or you were a barber, but like, man, that's so cool to control your own destiny. When I got to the University of Florida, um, I found out that the number of students that I surrounded myself with in the dormitories, in the fraternity house, sororities, apartments, they were constantly ordering food. And so I always looked at it like, what can we get delivered to our where we live, where we rented a place? And you could get pizza and you could probably find a local Chinese joint to get something, but the choices were very limited. So I really looked at it as more from a consumer perspective, like I would order this. I would order Wing Zone once a week, or especially with our late night hours after I got done at the bars. So that was kind of the premise of it. I was not some wing expert. I didn't come from a family of restaurateurs. And, I think for us, it was also just the simplicity of being a delivery based model with open for dinner and late night with a very simple menu. So I go back to the point of don't think you have to overcomplicate your business. Just do a few things exceptionally well. Make sure your market can, demand what you're offering. And for us, we had 40,000 students within, let's say, 5 miles of, a certain geographic area. It is a massive number.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and you'd identified this big kinda gap in the food delivery market, right? It's like you basically have, one primary option and then, yeah, maybe some Chinese food and that sort of thing. Because again, this is, pre
Oh, yeah.
DoorDash and, Uber Eats and all of that, so it was really unless someone from the restaurant brought the food to you as a delivery, you had to go pick it up, so no, it makes a lot of sense, and I would just really highlight, the fact that you guys didn't let the fact that you didn't have a lot of experience, you didn't have, any real capital to speak of, it doesn't sound like. You didn't even have an actual location outside of the kitchen in your frat house in the beginning, but you didn't let any of that stop you, and again, it's something I see so often, as I'm talking to people about business ownership and how to make that transition, and, I think people just feel like they have to have it all figured out in order to get started, and that's never gonna happen. If that's the mindset that you have, you won't ever start because you won't ever have it figured all out.
Yeah, and I wanna just share, like, we had opened, our first 4 locations in major college markets, and our 4th location we opened, which was in 1997, was in Tallahassee, Florida, at Florida State University, and it wasn't until we got to store 4 that we really had kind of, at that point, perfected the model. We knew the location to go into, what was on our menu, how to market it. But think about those first 3 or 4 years, how much learning we went into building the model. And even past store four, we learned as we got into, the first 10 or 20 or 50 or 100, you're always learning in the business. Now, I want to mention something that I think it's really amazing when people really venture into franchising, like the reasons why people franchise and why people buy into a franchise. And really, what you're buying into are the mistakes that were made prior to you being there, and then the business model of how to really not go through those growing pains. We made countless mistakes in our first 3 stores, and, you learn from those things. And so franchising is not a guarantee of success. It is a probability of success. You still need the grit. You still need the passion. You still need, you need the support of a franchisor, but you shouldn't be reinventing things on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a good point because I think a lot of times there is some confusion on, what you're actually getting when you buy into a franchise, and it's worth restating, it's not a guarantee of success. Just because you pay a franchise fee and sign a franchise agreement, a profitable business is not going to just materialize in front of you overnight. I think one of the best metaphors I've ever heard for it, great friend and mentor of mine, he was the founder and CEO of the very first franchise brand that I went to work for. I'm a couple years out of college, completely fell backwards into this whole world of franchising. And when we would have what we called a discovery day, right? So, kind of the final step of the
Sure.
process before people, became franchisees, they would come out to the headquarters, and he would give kind of a presentation to open it all up, and he used this metaphor that I think really resonated with people. But he would kind of compare franchising to a bicycle, right? And he would say, you know, it's the franchisor's job to build the bike, right? As the franchisee, it's your job, first of all, to make sure you're getting the right type of bike based on what your goals are, right? You've got all different types of bikes out there. You've got, mountain bikes, racing bikes, beach cruisers. I mean, you can go on and on, but first of all, make sure you're getting the right type of bike based on what you want to do. Secondly, you want a good quality bike, right? You want something that's sturdy, it's going to last, it's going to hold up, it's put together really well. But even if you get the right type of bike for what you're trying to do, the highest quality bike in that category, that bike doesn't go anywhere if you don't get on it and pedal, right? So it's the franchisee's job to pedal the bike. And if you kind of half-ass pedal it, like, okay, it's going to go, but you're probably not going to like be overwhelmed with the experience that you have or the results that you get. But, if you combine the right bike with someone that's willing to get on it and pedal their ass off and not stop even when it gets hard, that's where the results happen. And I think that was always such a good analogy to really kind of make sure people understood what that relationship was supposed to be like.
Yeah.
We'll get right back to the episode in just a minute, but if you've been considering business ownership, if you're already a business owner looking to expand and you're curious about franchising, I'd love to connect with you, answer any initial questions that you have, talk about a specific franchise, and detail the exact process that I use and have taken hundreds of people through to help them understand franchise ownership, find the right franchise for them, and conduct the necessary due diligence. Click the link in the show notes if you'd like to schedule a free, no obligation strategy call. I look forward to talking with you. And now back to the episode.
Not to get too off tangent with the bike metaphor, which I love, but also I've heard people talk about the horse and the jockey, right? So the
Okay.
horse is the
Yeah.
brand, the
Hmm.
franchise, but the jockey's the franchisee. He's got to control the horse, he's got to run it, he's got to make sure they finish the finish line. So there's a lot of those things. One thing I want to mention to the audience is that, there's so many different franchise opportunities out there. There's countless categories: child enrichment, home services, restaurants, health and wellness. But the secondary piece is there are a lot of really great emerging franchisors that are a little more entrepreneurial. Maybe you have some more protected territory. Maybe you have a relationship with the founder or have a seat at the table versus the ones that are more established. There is no right or wrong answer there. It's trying to understand a little bit of the franchise candidate or the person of what really fits kind of their DNA and their goals. So you've got a wide variety of different franchise opportunities. You also have a wide variety of different size of franchise groups.
Yeah. It's a great point. And so you and I had the chance to talk a couple of weeks ago, and it's one of the things that came up in our conversation. And I know you've done, some consulting work with a variety of emerging franchise brands. And so yeah, it's something I wanted to really have you expand on a little bit because it's so true. And I don't think, a lot of people, even really know what to look for, what the difference might be. I think they hear emerging franchise and they just kind of assume, well, that's got to be riskier than, going with something that's more established. And in some ways, that's probably accurate, right? But
Sure.
as you just kind of alluded to, there's a lot of advantages for the right person getting in with the right emerging brand. If you go and become a franchisee with Subway today, I'm not to pick on Subway, but like you're whatever thousandth, franchisee for them. Like you probably aren't going to have the CEO's cell phone number.
That's right.
You're not going to have a direct line to the leadership team. You're probably not going to have a ton of influence in what Subway's doing, right? It's just that's a pretty fully baked cake at this point, and it's just come in and execute, and it should be fairly predictable what type of results you're going to get. So there are people out there that I think are you know wired a little bit more entrepreneurially, and they wouldn't be as likely to thrive in something that's that established, and I don't know if rigid is the right word, but you don't have a ton of flexibility in terms of how you operate the business. Whereas a lot of these emerging franchises are going to give you more of that. You're still going to have, the model and the playbook to follow in the beginning. You're still going to have the support, right? It's kind of a cliche in at this point, but with franchising, you're in business for yourself, but not by yourself, right? So you still have that partner that's mutually incentivized for you to be successful. But there are some real benefits that come with it. What are some of the things that you would say? I'm trying to think the best way to ask this question. 'Cause not all, just
Red
like not all
flags maybe,
franchise
or
well, yeah, so, like, not obviously, not all franchises are created equally, not all emerging franchises are created equally, right? So, like, maybe the way to ask the question is, as you're getting approached by emerging franchises for your services, your consulting services, were there any deal breakers where if you saw that this emerging brand was doing this or not doing this, you're like, "Hey guys, I'm not interested in helping," or what were some of the qualities you were looking for in an emerging brand to say, "You know what? I think I can really help these guys. I think they're onto something, and this isn't just going to be a flash in the pan."
yeah, so a quick shameless plug for me on my book, From Frat House to Franchising, because I address this really. The book is intended for anyone who is looking for entrepreneurship, business ownership. Could be a franchisee, could be someone that's not even in franchising, could be a franchisor. I created something called the 5 key metrics of success in franchising, and then I also created something called the 9 pillars of building a successful franchise organization. Um, I've worked with about a dozen what I call emerging brands. Now, my definition of emerging is typically less than 50 operating units and less than 5 years in franchising.
Okay.
Because like anything else, you need scale and you need time.
Yes.
One of the some of the key things that I really pitch to people is, would you sell this franchise to your brother, your mother, your best friend? Like, do you really believe in the brand? Does it give you a really strong financial opportunity running it well in the right market, in the right location, but would you really do that? And if they pause and say, I don't know if I would actually, well, there's nothing wrong with that today. Maybe it's, hey, let's take a step back and figure out how we improve the unit level economics. One thing I also stress to people is that as an emerging franchisor, they are buying into you. If you're a founder, a CEO, your vision, your passion, your future within the company, you have to have the basics, right? You've got to have that operating system, that training system, the support that you provide franchisees. But at the end of the day, sometimes I have to be the bearer of, I wouldn't say bad news, but maybe you're not ready yet. I never tell people you will never be a successful franchisor, right? That's not really my place to be there. I may coach them in some areas of, I don't think you're ready right now because you need to improve A, B, and C. If that means that I didn't capture that opportunity or that revenue into my company, so be it. I want to do what's right. And I want to give people kind of an interesting perspective of someone that's done it before. One mistake I made at Wing Zone was we were never capitalized to the level we should have been, right? It was bootstrapped from the first store to the second to the seventh to franchising to growing the franchise. And so, one thing I tell emerging franchisors is I will ask them, where are you at in your capital plan? How much money do you have to invest in this? Because as a franchisor, you may not see a dime of profit on that company for 3 years down the road.
Yeah, at least, I mean, I think I've seen this many times myself with just young franchise brands being way undercapitalized, and that can create all types of issues, but especially if it's something that's a brick and mortar concept, right? So from the time you start selling franchises, you're going to have, this runway, probably minimum 6 months, 9 to 12 months,
Yeah.
probably more realistic, again, depending on the type of real estate and the complexity of the build out and things like that. And then the business has to open and get ramped up to a point where there's enough royalty revenue coming in to the franchisor. And so I know people that work with emerging franchises, and I think one of the metrics they always look at is I probably won't get this exactly right, but you know at what
Royalty sufficient or royalty
yep,
profitable,
royalty
right?
sufficient where you've got enough money coming in through royalties alone to cover the infrastructure at the franchisor level. Because what you don't want to do as a new franchisor is be so reliant on selling franchises so that those initial franchise fees coming in, if you can't make payroll next month if you don't sell a franchise this month, because that's when you start possibly bringing in some of the wrong types of people
No
because you're
doubt.
desperate
And I
to
want to
to
add
sell
one thing,
franchises.
Wes, which is
Please.
as an if an emerging franchisor is listening, or someone that's like, hey, I think I have a great business model. I've proven it to be successful, and I want to become a franchisor. I do not want anyone to view the franchise fee, the upfront fee, as really a profit center. It is there to
Yeah.
capture cost, marketing cost. If you're working with a franchise consultant, you've got support and travel to help them open. You've got some team there. Do not look at some $40 or $50,000 franchise fee as a profit center. If you're covering your costs, you're doing phenomenally well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, every franchisor I've worked for, that was our view on it, right? We weren't looking to profit off of the initial franchise fee. Um, what are what are some of the other things that you've kind of, I guess, consistently seen as you've, talked with emerging brands that might cause you to say, hey, you're not quite ready yet. Here are, the things I would suggest going and working on. And once these are, a little bit more in line, then you'll be in a better position to really step on the gas when it comes to franchising. Are there any other kind of common themes that you've seen?
There are, and I appreciate you asking that question because I talk about these 9 pillars of building a successful franchise organization. And one thing I want the listeners and the audience to understand is that I don't care if you have one franchise location or 1,000, you still need these things, right? One of the key things is, how are you handling your real estate and construction process if you are a brick and mortar? What is your tech stack? Like, how are you managing the side of how customers order, your business reporting dashboard? Do you have funding partners to work with candidates to go through the funding process?
That's so crucial.
A couple other key things that I would say are, how is your supply chain? I came out of the restaurant world, and I can tell you that if we had 20 stores within a certain geographic area, let's say Atlanta, great, no problem. Then all of a sudden you open one in Las Vegas or one in Des Moines, Iowa. It throws a complete wrench in the system. I am a huge fan of regional growth, before national growth. And even if you're not someone that has to supply someone with products, it still helps with brand recognition. And then
Yeah.
one last point that I just want to make on this one, as far as some of the key things, is your training system for new franchisees has to be completely buttoned up. I believe the foundational piece of franchise success is the training they receive from the franchisor prior to opening up. And so
Okay.
I've always invested heavily in making sure the franchisees understand the system, kind of you can be taught to them, they can train the trainer, meaning they can teach it to other people. And I can also tell you that if a franchisee fails, unfortunately, they're going to look at some of those things of, did I get the right playbook for success?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Um, yeah, a couple things I wanna hear more from you on that. So I guess we'll stick with the training, and then I wanna just talk about kinda infrastructure,
Yes.
personnel in general, because I know that's something I've seen quite a bit. Franchisors tend to run pretty lean, and, if you're a brand that's picking up some momentum, I love how I said I'm gonna stay with training, and then I just go right into the next. That's how my
Well,
mind works.
people's the key piece, right? And
Yeah.
I agree
Yeah,
with you.
people, right?
Right.
So, but I've seen brands that catch some momentum, and they go from, 2 or 3 franchisees to 30, 40 franchisees in a pretty quick period of time, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, we are way understaffed. We were good 4 months ago. Now we're drastically understaffed. So, like, what are some of the I guess, indicators that you would recommend an emerging franchisor be looking at when it comes to, how they're staffing themselves at the franchisor level
Yeah.
based
Well,
on growth?
it's another great question, Wes. My philosophy is that you have got to forward invest in your team, right? So this philosophy of, well, I'll add a director of operations once I get to 10 stores. The reality is if you get to 10 stores and don't have that key person, you're going to end up going back and having to correct a lot of the mistakes you made. So I look at things. Now, the nice thing in franchising is if someone signs a franchise agreement today, let's just say it's a brick and mortar concept, right? They're not opening for a year later. So you've got a little bit of runway to kind of build that, but you can't wait too late into the process. I also want to share with the listeners, some mistakes that I made at Wing Zone. The first person I hired was a franchise salesperson, right? And I was like, oh, I need someone to go sell franchises. Meanwhile, the best person in the company to sell franchises was me, right?
Yeah.
I should have
Yeah.
hired someone in training, someone in marketing, someone that really can impact the franchisee's success. I am one that, as a founder or a CEO or as an owner, you need to understand a little bit of what your best skill sets are, and then what are some things that you feel that maybe you're not that great at that you can bring people in? So one of the things that I stress to emerging franchisors is the founder has to be the visionary, the spokesperson, the face of the brand, you know, shaking hands and kissing babies and all that sort of thing. It doesn't mean that they don't have a role in marketing or operations or training, but I really push people to bring on a tactical person from those basic necessities. Training, marketing, and operations is how your franchisees are going to have the most success.
Are you a EOS traction
I am.
fan? Yeah.
I am. And I think, I wanna mention this if people are using it or not using it. One of the flaws, I think, with EOS that I think is tough on an emerging brand is it's hard for them to go full throttle.
Yeah.
I've
I agree.
created my
I
own
agree.
version of EOS, which is a light version, right? You gotta have your accountability chart, it's a must. You gotta have your scorecards that you're tracking everything. You gotta have your rocks, you gotta have your L10s. But don't worry too much about where are we going to be in 5 years? Or, what's our 10-year plan? Sometimes the best thing for you is to just get your team laser focused on what they're doing for the next quarter
Yeah.
to 6 months.
Yeah, make sure everyone's rowing in the same direction, but, yeah, it's tough with EOS, I think, because it kinda takes a one size fits all approach, and, obviously, every organization is not in the same place in their growth cycle, but the overall, thesis of, hey, if the founder is kind of the visionary, you need to bring in someone to complement, the areas that you're not as strong in that can, really be that operations driven implementer. And then having the team on the same page, working towards the same goals is critical.
Yeah,
Um,
I am, and I think rocks are amazing because it's something that gives people a focus of if you're a company that's implemented EOS, and this isn't a pitch for them, and you're hitting 90% of your rocks, I guarantee your company's moving in a great direction, right? Things are getting done and momentum is moving in your direction. So, I think that's a really important point of, some operating system. But listen, as a founder of an emerging brand, you're going to wear a lot of hats, right? You're going to have to, do those things. The other thing I want to share is that, outsourcing some things can be really impactful for an emerging franchisor.
I wanted to
Outsource your
ask
real
you about
estate,
this.
outsource your construction, maybe outsource some of your marketing support. Don't feel you have to bring on $100,000 a year position. Maybe you can outsource it for half that price and not take on some of that, responsibility.
We'll get right back to the episode, but I wanted to quickly share a free resource with you. If you're curious about franchise ownership and want to learn more about how countless people, including myself, have leveraged franchising as a way to create more freedom for themselves and to take control of their livelihood, I've put together an ebook. It's called Franchise Wealth Creation, and it's the perfect starting point for anyone that's just curious to learn more about this whole franchise thing and how I've helped hundreds of other people navigate all the steps involved in understanding and researching franchising. So click the link in the show notes, fill out a short form. I'll send you the ebook. I think it's a great starting point if you're curious at all about learning more about franchising. All right, let's get back to the episode. Yeah, this is an exact topic I wanted to get your thoughts on because and even with more established brands, I still see a lot of these things outsourced. Marketing, if it's a business that needs a call center, real estate. I mean, almost every franchise I work with that's a brick and mortar concept is outsourcing the real estate component. Um, is there a point, is there a turning point where you would say, hey, once you're established enough and large enough, it's beneficial to have everything in-house, or is your thought
Absolutely.
still, yeah,
I think especially if, I had a director of construction at Wing Zone when we started opening maybe 10 to 15 stores a year, right? But if you're a brand that's gonna open 2 in the next 12 months, you don't need a director of construction that's gonna
you can't
manage the
afford someone.
contractor and the architects and some of those things as well. Listen, I always love the fact of someone that's internal that really knows the brand and can live it every day. Maybe the other play is, you don't have to bring in the top C-level people when you're first starting out. Maybe it's more tactical. Have a training director that's gonna create great programs, or have a marketing manager that's gonna kind of handle local store marketing and some of the things that franchisees really need as they're opening up. So, I think there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I wouldn't say it's a one size fits all. But you don't want to be having a revolving door of your corporate team. The stability is very important.
Yeah, it is, especially given that, as you mentioned, and I agree, very often someone that is buying into an emerging brand, a big part of what they're buying is the leadership team that they probably got to interact with a fair amount throughout the discovery process. So I can remember an instance at one of the brands I worked for. I was doing franchise sales and development, and we had a COO that was very dynamic, very engaging, pretty active with candidates throughout the process. When they came to discovery day, the COO was very involved. Like, I had people, and then he ended up, leaving for another opportunity. And I had numerous people come back to me, and they're like,
What
he was a
happened?
big part of why we bought in to this, and now he's gone. And it's like, I don't
Yeah.
know.
And there's one thing that I talked about earlier in our conversation was the, longevity plan here. If you're someone that is looking to franchise your business, please look at this as a long-term investment. It's a long-term play. And trust me, when you build a robust franchise system, you can build an amazing valued company, similar to what I did. But I think this notion of that it is, I got to go as fast as I can. Maybe I'm just cut from a different cloth, or just have a different philosophy. I am much more about quality over quantity. And I just think that that's a message that I like to deliver to founders looking at this as, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to be easy. It is maybe equally, if not even harder than what you've done in your business to date.
yeah. I mean, look, I've never started a business and then franchised it, but I've been involved, pretty early stage with a couple of different franchise brands, and got to know those founders pretty well. And whatever they had done in the business prior to franchising was a walk in the park compared to, once there. And it is something that I think is really worth, founders that are considering franchising really taking some time to think through it. And probably, just like if you're considering buying a franchise, before you do, you talk to other franchisees that are already doing it, and you learn, as much as you can from their experience. Go call some other founders that have franchised their business. Find out what they would do differently. Would they still have made the decision to franchise their business? Because your role very likely almost entirely changes, right? If you were, a founder that was very involved in building the business that the franchise is going to be built off of, you're probably going to have to delegate most of the involvement in the original business to someone else if you set your sights on franchising, because you have this whole other, you know, franchise sells, building out the team and the infrastructure. I mean, there's, like you said, wearing numerous hats. So,
Yeah, I want to add
um,
one thing to that, Wes, and I think
please.
people should be viewing your current business. Let's say you are running your corporate type of business or locations or whatever you're doing, and the franchise side of the business completely in separate companies. I believe they probably have separate people, they have separate P&Ls, they have separate investments. The idea that you can just run both was something that I learned very quickly. We had 7 company-owned stores. We had really pushed on developing a great franchise system, and I just said one day, "This is impossible. This is never going to work unless we really separate company A and company B." And I think that that is something that if you can't step away from your current business to really focus on this new venture called franchising, then you need to kind of pause and figure out how you can develop that over the course of the next months or years.
Yeah, totally agree. It's I think a big decision, and I have seen the same that you're alluding to with, people feeling like, hey, I've got to just get to, whatever the magic number is, if there is a magic number, 100 territories, 100 licenses as quickly as possible. And I think it's driven, from, there's a lot of private equity money that's come into franchising over the last, decade or so. And I've seen some crazy valuations, not necessarily crazy and like they're not justified, but just like you said, you can build if you do this right, you may not even have to do it right. If you can just do it to a certain number of licenses, like you can get a crazy valuation for your business.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think
So I
there's
think
a
maybe there's just kind of this perception of, hey, is this a bubble that's not going to be around forever? And could I miss out on it if my brand doesn't get to a certain point before this kind of dies off? I don't know, but I've also seen, some examples of where brands grew too fast and then a lot of problems ensued
yeah, no doubt.
afterwards.
I agree with you 100%. And I think, listen, that is what everyone has to determine their own path, right? You mentioned something earlier that I think is really important to bring up to the listeners, and that is really doing your own due diligence, your own research, reaching out to people in the industry. I have always found that people in franchising are incredibly open and welcoming and willing to talk to people. I feel it. It's a very small industry. I am shocked how many people I extend the offer to say, "Hey, if you have a problem, you have a question, you wanna just pick my brain, reach out to me," right? Very few people do. I don't know if they think like, "Is this guy gonna charge me for this?" Which I'm not. Is he just gonna, like, tell me I'm an idiot, which I'm not. But I think ultimately it's like, do your own due diligence, your own homework. I am one that believes in innovation, but it's through learning and guidance. You may go through a process and say, "Man, I want no part of franchising." Great. You did your research, you figured out what it was good. But I just think, the reality is people just think it's easy. I have a successful business. I'm going to start franchising it, but you got to do your homework.
You do. You do, because there's more to it than just the dollars and cents, right? Is this a franchise I can afford to get into, or am I in a capital position to franchise my business? I mean, there's a lot of nuance to it. This is where I try to spend a lot of time with the people that I work with,
Sure.
and get them to really think through not just, what type of business do you want to own and what are your goals in owning a business, relative to the financial goals that you have, but what do you want your day to day as a business owner to look like? Because that can look very different depending on the type of business that you own. But also, as it pertains to buying a franchise, what's the culture of the organization that you think would be the best fit for you? What does that kind of look like? Because different franchises are going to have very different cultures, in some cases. And you can be successful, I believe, in a franchise where maybe it's not the best culture fit for you for one reason or another, but you get into a franchise where it's a good business, the support's there, and it's a good culture fit, and you really can kind of vibe or mesh with the majority of the other franchises. That's a superpower, right? So there's
Well
I think
said.
a lot of nuance that is just important for people to look at, as they're making these decisions and evaluating different options. And I think that's one of the harder parts of it, because unless you've been through the process before, you may not know some of that. And there's just a lot of noise out there. There's thousands of franchises, and I think I've already said it in this podcast, and I say it all the time. They are not all created equally.
No doubt.
What else? What else do you want to share with the audience? I'm going to have you back at some point, because there's so much
There is a
else that
lot.
we could get into. So this is just just kind of the tip of the iceberg, I think. But what else you want to leave the listeners with? Whether that's someone that's already got a business and they're considering franchising it, or someone that's just trying to figure out how they can make that transition into business ownership in the first place.
Yeah, well, first of all, I am such a proponent of business ownership through franchising, right? I just think it gives you the probability or likelihood of success where starting your own is very challenging, right? Listen, I'm here for a lot of reasons, but I do want to give back and I want to make sure that people can learn from me, my mistakes. I didn't have necessarily a mentor or someone that I really, and maybe that was my fault. I didn't really find that person that would kind of coach me and guide me through it. Um, you know, read my book. I think it's going to give you an honest review of what it takes to build a company, build a franchise. What should I look for in a franchise if I'm a franchise candidate? And then the last thing is, listen, you can go to my website, you can hit me up on LinkedIn. You've got a question, comment, want some help with something, I'm happy to do it, right? I think um, I'm at a point in my life right now where I want people to succeed, and I'm okay giving you an honest answer, even if you're like, man, I wish you wouldn't have told me that. It's okay, right? It's my opinion. It doesn't mean it's right or wrong. But just do your work out there and be a magnet for information and people that have done it before.
Well said. Well said. And I know that's a genuine offer from you when you extend it to, for anyone to reach out, and I completely agree with your sentiment that, franchising is such a great, I mean, my wife and I bought our first franchise 8 years ago. Um, do I think we would have been successful if we would have just had an idea for a business and started? I'm sure we would have figured it out. Like, we're pretty stubborn, both of us, and we're pretty hardworking. So, like, I'm sure probably through just sheer, effort and stubbornness, we would have figured it out. But I mean, franchising fast tracked us. Like, we're so much further ahead, at this stage of the game. I mean, 2 years in, we were so much further ahead than we would have been.
It's a great
Um,
story.
so yeah, I'm a huge proponent of it, and the franchising community, as you said, is incredible. It still blows my mind to this day how, number one, small of a world it is kind of once you get into franchising, and you never really see people get into franchising and then get out. Like, even if you move around from, kind of one place to another, you tend to stay in franchising in some capacity, and
You do. By the way, so
everybody is
funny, quick,
willing.
funny story, Wes. Like,
Yeah.
of our 3 or 4 biggest competitors, I mean, I had a genuine relationship with the CEOs and founders of those companies, right? It
I have no
wasn't like,
trouble
I
believing that.
hate those people, whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I was
I
like,
have no.
listen, I'm not going to spill the beans on everything, but it's good to, talk about some things.
Well, for sure. And I mean, look, I go to conferences every year where there are hundreds of franchise brands there being represented, and everyone's friendly, right? Everyone's out, hanging out, dinner after dinner. Technically, they're all kind of competing with each other,
Yeah,
even
but
if they're
half
not in
those
the
people
same
aren't telling the
industry.
truth anyway, though. No, I'm just kidding.
Half of them probably not, especially after a couple of drinks, and half of them. It's the conferences I go to. It's mostly salespeople.
Sure.
So yeah, you know that half of them are just blowing smoke. But no, it's a great community, and that's, I think, another part that gets overlooked a lot of times when people are considering franchising versus other options, is just that community that you have once you're part of a franchise. Not just the support you get from the franchisor, but you have this network and community of other franchisees. They all own the same business as you. You're not competing
It's
against
true.
them. I mean, at this point, 8 years in, to one of our franchises, we don't need a ton from the franchisor, right? There's
It's
a
true.
manufacturing component. So make my product well, keep my prices as low as you can within reason. It's kind of all we really need from them. But, we get a ton of value from the other franchisees that we communicate with on a regular basis. So, um,
Well, Wes, I'd love to come back anytime you want to have
we
me,
will.
but I really appreciate the time today.
Well, hey, likewise. Pleasure's all mine. We'll put a link to the book in the notes, make it easy for people to find. LinkedIn profile and website will all be in the show notes. So, Matt, really appreciate it. Thanks for everything that you're doing to, help promote franchising and, help coach emerging franchisors so that they get off on the right foot. And to everyone listening, thanks so much for tuning in to Franchise Unfiltered, and we'll catch you next time.